Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Live at 5. I am your host, curator Kevin Adkison with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research. It is a crisp and beautiful and snowy sunny day here in Bloomfield Township at the Lloyd Wright designed Smith House. And we've done Live at Fives from the Smith House before. In fact, some of our very most popular Live at Fives have been here at the Smith House. But today is a different tour, a special tour, because I have spent the last 2 weeks working with a Cranbrook Academy of Art fiber student, Melissa Webb, doing a special installation for her midterm reviews. And so she is a fiber artist who works across media, and so this is a piece that combines knitting, weaving, crocheting, and other fiber and textile craft with film and sound and sculpture. There's multiple students who have been involved, and I really love this piece. I think that you're going to love it too. And just like the Smiths were so involved in the acquisition of art from students at the Academy of Art, I think it's wonderful that now we have an Academy of Art student who is working again inside the house. So if you're just joining us for one of your first Live at Fives, or if you haven't been able to tour the Smith House in person or on video, it was designed by the late great American architect Lloyd Wright in 1946. The Smith family, who were school teachers in the city of Detroit, moved into their Lloyd Wright signed building in 1950. And Cranbrook has owned it since 2017. And we get directly to Melissa's work as we step into the house. So Lloyd Wright wanted us to experience the entrance to the home through compression and release. And so he squeezes us into this little narrow corridor. And now we are released into the living room. And we are experiencing right away Melissa's wondrous piece. So we see the sort of hanging elements. We see these natural forms. And the way that she has added all of this texture and depth, I almost feel like the garden gnomes could be popping out at any moment. And you see the way that her pieces interact really quite beautifully with Andrea Aarons's pillows. And Andrea Aarons was a textile artist who studied with weaver in residence Robert Kidd in 1970, and she wove these pillows. So the Smiths always had these pillows, or since the early 70s. And I love the way that Melissa's piece just seems to accrete onto the entire arrangement. Now, I have invited Melissa here to explain the piece and to tell us a bit more about herself. And so we're both going to be masked, and we'll have a little conversation here. So, Melissa, welcome.
Hello.
She emerges from the work itself. Did you make your own mask?
I did.
And so, first of all, is green your favorite color?
It is. I'm not sure how you could tell that, but it is.
And so if you would tell us, where are you from? What was your background in art? How did you discover Cranbrook?
Okay. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland, and I went to the Maryland Institute College of Art and studied fiber there, and actually taught there for a good amount of years as well. And all of my mentors that became my colleagues and friends and family eventually, a bunch of them went to Cranbrook. And so I kind of came up hearing about Cranbrook as a really important place to study fiber. So I was just at a point in my life where I was ready to just, go to grad school, and Cranbrook was a really great option for me.
And so you are in your second year in the fiber department, and Those of you who have been watching Live at 5 long enough know that we've talked a lot about the Cranbrook Fiber Department. Of course, it was established by Loya Saarinen in 1929 as a commercial studio. She took on students by 1930. And then it had a really series of very important weavers, from Marianne Strangel to Robert Kidd to Gerhard Nodell and now Mark Newport. But there's also been a significant change from students who did pieces that were mounted on a wall, much like Loya Saarinen did make tapestries. But there were also students who made rugs and who made auto industry upholstery. And there's a distinct shift that happens at Cranbrook and in art in general, so that we arrive to Melissa, who is really thinking about things that are very different from those sort of practical and architectural fibers. So can you talk some about why you're attracted to fiber as a general sense?
Okay, so fiber really encompasses so many different possible materials and techniques, and a lot of people think of it as the traditional weaving and tapestry like he was mentioning, but it really is all pliable lines and all pliable planes. It's really every material you can imagine. So it's very versatile, so you can have everything from a tapestry against a white wall to something like this, to performance, to video. So it suits me because I work multidisciplinary way.
Yeah. And so you studied at the Baltimore Institute of Art, the Maryland Institute of Art.
Yeah.
When did you start working with found objects? Because these are doilies and weavings that you have purchased at estate sales and other places.
Mm-hmm. When did I start? I think it was maybe 4 years ago or so, and I have been buying these doilies at estate sales, but also on eBay from sellers that go to estate sales. And what I'll do is I will ask the people who are selling who made them and where they came from, in an attempt to try to figure out, to sort of make a point about how whenever the work, there's like a high emotional value to these objects, and a high amount of labor, and then when those things are released onto the vintage, the secondhand market, then that is all erased. So that history is erased. So I try to see if I can find that sweet spot where somebody can tell me who did this thing, who made this beautiful thing. And I do come across a lot of people who do know the maker, but then I come across a lot of people who have no idea. But I document everything, and then all of the items, and then I start to collaborate with the makers, who are mostly deceased, because we're talking about the 20s through the 50s, with most of these doilies that I'm getting. So then I start to work into them. I start to crochet into them. I start to dye them, piece them, combine them, and then you get an explosion such as what is happening now here.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so amazing, and I'll walk our camera a little bit closer to the piece so that we can begin to see what she means about dyeing them together and then also combining them. And so it has this sort of, it seems like nature has exploded and nature is sort of taking over the architecture. I look at the way that Frank Lloyd Wright's grid, that is so insistent in the coffee table and the floor and the cushions, is really softened by your piece. So what inspired you here at the Smith House in this piece?
Well, I'm really interested in Frank Lloyd Wright's philosophies about architecture, and how the people can live inside and connect to the outside, and this particular house has such a beautiful inside-outside sort of dynamic with the big picture windows, and the fact that you can look in, especially at night when the projection's really bright. Right now it's, of course, only 5 o'clock. but the whole building lights up with this sort of organic world that could be, the outside coming in. So I feel like we had a lot in common with our sort of ideas of inside and outside, not about everything, but I also feel very connected to Sarah Smith and the Smiths in general, and their way of collecting other, student work and other artists' work, and then living with these objects. And I really found, especially with the pillows, like Kevin mentioned, that my work and the objects in the house really worked well together in a way that surprised me, actually, and I'm very happy with.
Yeah. And one thing that I admired, so I have to do a shout out and thank two of my collections interpreters, Matt Horn and Elena Ivanova, who've come and been here with Melissa in the house while she's done all the work. But I have admired Melissa's dedication to not just sort of unpacking these things and throwing them out, but she really talks about, well, what is the logic of each piece and where is it coming from? And so much like Frank Lloyd Wright, who talked about architecture growing from the landscape, in both the physical sense that, the Smith house is sort of like a pancake in this little valley, and the wood and materials feel so soft. But Frank Lloyd Wright was also very much thinking of architecture coming out of the sort of American experience and the American ideal. And I see the same thing with your work, where it really is sort of growing out of that corner and it's cascading over this ledge with a lot of intentionality. And so I think you really put a lot of effort into how the piece interacts with the physical space on both the sort of logistical way of, like, I was asking, oh, do you want to try and hang things? Do you want to try and do too much crazy stuff? And you're like, it sort of couldn't grow like that, so I don't want to try and hang it like that. And so we have these moments where I've discussed Mr. Smith's preference of using permanent botanicals, also known as plastic plants. And you see how Mr. Smith uses the permanent botanicals coming over the ledge. And that's something that Mr. Smith would have seen in the Frank Lloyd Wright drawings, where Frank Lloyd Wright builds all these clear stories in ledges, and then he wants sort of plants to be growing. But think about, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't really want to have a real potted plant up there. And so we have Mr. Smith's solution to Frank Lloyd Wright's design idea, and then Melissa really picks it up. And I thought it was quite clever how you got those to stay up there. So
okay. So actually, it was your idea, Kevin, and I thank you for that. There are rocks in socks.
Yes. So Melissa went and gathered rocks from the campus and then put them in a sock and is hanging them off. So we're getting a little into the belly of the beast with the making there. But there's other instances where I told Melissa the story about how Mrs. Smith, who developed a love of Japan, in large part because Frank Lloyd Wright loved Japan. And so Mrs. Smith got interested in doing dried floral ikebana arrangements. And so this is a piece that amazingly has been here in the house since the 1950s. And there used to be a permanent botanical ikebana in this vase. So in historic photographs, there is a dried arrangement. That one didn't survive. And when I told Melissa that, she said, oh, I know exactly the perfect piece to add to it. And so there are these little conversations with, I think, Mrs. Smith going on with the piece. And then another detail I'll point out, and then if Melissa wants to add anything, is this rock that is resting on a doily, resting on Rodin. And this is one of the rocks from Cranbrook's walls, close to the old north gates. And of course, Cranbrook's walls are being rebuilt over time. It's something that Capital Projects is very dedicated to, the preservation of those 1904 to 1908 walls. But they're not all restored yet. And so an architecture student, Ryan, who we saw last week, gathered some of the rocks from Cranbrook's walls, and he began casting them. And so there is this sort of connection to Cranbrook. And of course, the Smiths were huge fans and supporters of Cranbrook. Now, Cranbrook owns the house. And so I like that in this sort of fairy garden, there are these little rocks that pop up. How did this exactly come about, Melissa? And what do you think about the...
Well, I elect in architecture. I have for a few semesters or a couple semesters.
So almost like a minor in architecture,
Right,
if you will.
right. And really have enjoyed being exposed to that department. And Ryan, I really just love the way, his name's Ryan David. I really love the way that he thinks in this. He's been taking a lot of walks around Bloomfield Hills and sort of cataloging the area and surveying his new land because he's a first year. And then, located that rock on one of his walks. And I like sort of the expansive way that he thinks, and I just really wanted to bring him in on this project, and I thought that he and I would work well together, and we did, and we have.
Yeah. So if people have questions as we watch, I hope that it is, I hope that you can hear both of us this week. If you have questions, do type them in and we can answer them. And meanwhile, I will just do some close-ups around the piece. And so there are these strange little cones. I don't know what weaving technique this is. Is this?
That's crochet.
Crocheted.
And it's wired.
Crocheted and wired cones.
Lichen. It's a lichen.
Okay, these are the lichen. And then what about these bits that almost look like scarves or...
Well, that one you're pointing at right now, is actually from Mexico, from the Oaxaca Valley, where there's a whole town of weavers that naturally dye yarns and spin and naturally dye them, and that is a yarn that was dyed with some kind of a melon, so not very replaceable. I got it years ago.
So that's dyed with melons. What other kind of dyes do you use?
So I'll tell you about one other one. There's one with tree moss that I got too, which is right over here. That's also from the same dyer and spinner. But as far as my own dyeing processes, which are like literally everywhere in this installation, and dyeing yarns and doilies and other textiles and things that I make as well, I use MX dyes, which is it is a chemical dye. I don't use, because I like the really, really brilliant colors, and want to be able to replicate certain colors again and again. So I use a cellulose dye, or a dye that works with cellulose fabrics, like cotton and rayon. Everything that is dyed in here, I basically only buy cotton items.
Yeah. Susanna asked, could you point out some of the pieces that demonstrate your own handicraft? I mean, I think, building all the little towers and sort of creating these larger flowers.
You want me to?
Sure.
I'll get in there. Okay, so there's a lot of little moments, well, all of these, there's a lot of little moments where there's these sort of lichen-like things that I actually dyed all of the yarns that are in here, other than the ones from Mexico. Over here, we have a kind of conglomerate of several doilies and my crochet. So this is a very good example of the kind of collaboration I'm doing, where I'm dyeing yarns, dyeing parts, deconstructing. And over here as well.
How attached are the bigger flowers that almost look like pillows? Like, how attached is this?
So they are pinned, and I don't like to use any processes that are permanent, because I want to be able to reuse or return certain things to their original states.
But green. I love the one you're floating over now that has this sort of coronavirus coming off of it.
Oh yeah, So I actually made this as soon as everything started locking down. As soon as the virus was here, I made this item, and it keeps coming up in different pieces. So here's another sort of
And
object made with lots of different processes and dyes.
And notice as Melissa goes across her work how the pillows sort of interplay seamlessly between her pieces and the Smith's pieces.
Well, this is one of my favorites over here. I also buy some yarns from dyers from the States as well, and vintage yarns that I dye.
You know, it was Walter Gropius who, at the Bauhaus, and Melissa, I'll capture you standing in your work. It was Walter Gropius who talked about the mismatch between the fiber arts, the labor that goes into them, versus the sort of reward, like the value of the piece, especially intergenerational. And so I love that you've brought these pieces into a sort of new and elevated value, because you're right, when you see these things at an estate sale, they always look so sad and so limp, but you think about the labor that went into them and the value they had to the maker. Mm-hmm. And so I really like that you are sort of transferring them into this new utopian fantasy.
Yes, that is definitely something I think about a lot. And I have sort of a mindset of being a collector. There's certain ones that I will definitely not touch and wouldn't even really integrate because they're just so beautiful the way they are. There's ones that I leave as is but layer in with a possibility of deconstructing. And then there's ones that I completely disassemble, like all of the little flower bits everywhere are coming from doilies. And then there's ones like Kevin was saying that really just have seen better days and maybe were washed too many times or they're dirty. And then I intervene there by, sort of enlivening them.
Clarice asked, there's a waterfall effect to some of the pieces. Did you intentionally use any of the blues and greens in reference to Frank Lloyd Wright's use of water, like at Falling Water, or his nature?
I think it's more, like I was saying before, kind of just a commonality between his work and mine, because I've been working with natural forms for a long time, and I wasn't thinking about Frank the whole time I was working on this. It's just sort of an intervention in his sort of built environment.
And then Richard asked, how much is rigid? And I think I can answer that. None of this is rigid. So it's, even though we're walking on it, it's very much a sort of experiential,
soft.
You can move through it. And so part of what took, part of the labor of the piece was arranging all of these things artfully and making it look effortless, as if it is intentional. I just want to step back and show you what the piece looks like overall. And Melissa has a website that I'll leave in the comments once I get finished broadcasting, but it's melissawebart.com. Mm-hmm. And she will post there, and we'll also post it on the Cranbrook website, video of the piece in the daylight that also has the sound, and video of it all the way at night, so that you can see what this looks like when it is projecting outside of the house. It is pretty wild because these projectors are so strong. They actually hit the oak trees in the yard and sort of give this very unearthly glow. And one piece that I love, the sort of interaction between it looks fabulous with all the Smith's textiles, but we've talked about on our Live at Fives before, this piece by Urban Japina, who is a 1970 graduate, studied with Robert Kidd, and then worked in Ann Arbor and Pinckney, Michigan, now some in Florida. And Urban Japina's piece, which was also inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright, though much like Melissa, was actually assembled by pieces he started working on before he knew it was a Frank Lloyd Wright commission, and then he finished it with the Frank Lloyd Wright edging. But down here at his signature, the UJ for Urban Japina, we see these wonderful colors, but we also see the copper thread that is weaving through. And even without the projectors, it really takes on the changing daylight of the yard. And so I really appreciate Melissa's piece because it joins in this very long conversation of Cranbrook weavers who are making pieces for the Smiths and the Smith house. And the element that we have left out of our discussion so far is the projection. And so what you're seeing projected are actually films of the work itself. And so she has documented the piece, and then she is projecting the piece onto the piece. And when the final video is finished in a few months, when she has gone through the production process, she's also accompanied the work by a piece from Beethoven. And so Beethoven was Frank Lloyd Wright's favorite musician. And also, Mrs. Smith played Beethoven every morning. So she would come out and she would sit at the Steinway under the piano cover, and she would fold the tapestry back, and she would play Beethoven to greet the day. And so Melissa and I are very grateful to Nathan Costa of Christchurch Cranbrook, the associate music minister there, who came over and played some Beethoven for us on this piano. It was really an amazing experience to have the house filled with music again. And then Melissa is going to combine that with sounds of nature that she gathered from the property. And so it adds to this sort of ethereal sense of the piece. Melissa, do you have anything else that you want to add?
Sure. One last thing is that in addition to the image, the projected image of me moving through the space, and doing video that way, I also have another layer. There's two layers, and the other layer is of this volcanic rock outside that is in the garden, which, Kevin could maybe tell you more about the history of that, but it's covered with lichens and mosses and is really just the kind of thing. I was very happy to find it because it's just the kind of thing I'm hoping to mimic. So there's a layer of that as well, which is hard to see right now because it's still too bright. But
yeah, so we'll wait for the final video. Now, I think it will be fun just for me to step outside and show you a little bit about what this piece looks like from a distance. So we're going to say goodbye to Melissa now, and I'll end live at 5 from outdoors. So thank you so much for doing this really amazing installation. Some people were commenting about will it go on, and I think that it will. No plans yet, but you'll continue developing this piece for different sites.
Yeah, and if anybody has any questions or doilies, let me know. You can go to my website, melissawebart.com, and contact me through the site.
Yeah. So you can either find her, you can find her website, Melissa Webb Art, or you can message me, and I'll make sure that you can get in touch. One of the last questions is, do you have a sense of the breakdown of found pieces versus made pieces? I would say that it is mostly found pieces.
It's I don't know if you could break it down like that because I've put my hand in every single one of the found pieces that you see here in some way, shape, or form. So it's a collaboration. I consider it a collaboration.
Okay, and if you'll hold the camera, you can say goodbye to everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you. This has been fun.
We are going to head out into the wilderness. Thank you, Melissa. We have snuck out into the garden, and it really is a beautiful day here. I realize I'm now putting snow prints into the freshly fallen snow, which may disturb our photographer who is waiting in the wings. But I did want to give you a chance just to see the piece from out here and to also have this beautiful view of the frozen pond here at sunset on a pretty glorious winter's day. And there you can see some of the rocks that are involved in the film. And then maybe we can just make out the piece glowing in the living room here. So I hope that everyone is having a wonderful week and enjoying the nice weather today. Just a couple of quick announcements. We did start the History of American Architecture lecture series on Monday with a lecture about Frank Lloyd Wright, Le Corbusier, and Alvar Aalto's visit to Cranbrook in the late 1930s. That lecture is available for viewing if you missed it, if you buy a ticket to the rest of the series. So there are 4 more lectures. On Monday night, I will be discussing Minoru Yamasaki, Louis Kahn, and James Wine's visits to Cranbrook in 1966, 68, and 73. And that lecture is on Monday at 11 a.m. and at 7 p.m. So it's a 5-week series about the history of American architecture through architects who have come to Cranbrook to talk to the students. I think the first one went really well. I am really excited about week 2, so head over to center.cranbrook.edu to get tickets to that. Melissa and I need to keep documenting the work and then take it all down before a VIP tour in the morning. So congratulations to Melissa. Thank you to Matt and Elena and Nathan Costa and everyone else who helped make this piece a reality. Cranbrook Security, P.D. Rierick, who's doing the photography now, Ryan and the other students who helped Melissa with the collaboration, and of course thanks to Greg Whitkop, our center director, for allowing us to stage this really interesting intervention here at the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. I'm Kevin Adkison with the Cranbrook Center for Collections and Research at the Frank Lloyd Wright Smith House. Until Monday night or until next Wednesday. See you then.